Hello everyone, my name is Andre and welcome to my video. In this tutorial, I will actually illustrate some issues that people have when they start coding in Unity, following other tutorials as well. And I will try to get rid of, hopefully, all the fog that is in your mind right now. Because I remember that when I first started off with Unity, I was always confused. I was like copying code and I wasn't really understanding how you could even come up with such procedures with such codes. So my idea of programming, probably like many of you who are watching this video right now, is I want to do this in my game. I look up how to do it online and I copy that script and maybe understand a few things. So what I'm going to do is help you understand how you code in Unity, what is a component, because I'll explain to you that Unity's main system for everything is the component system. And actually, I'll show you some demonstrations of what I mean. You probably have already seen a script like this. For example, if we go create C# script, and we're gonna do, let's say, print to console. And what we can do is then right click over here, right, compile time, let that compile. Okay, if you right click, create an empty, and we can call this print to log. It doesn't matter what you call it, it's an empty game object. What you can do is drag your script over here and it appears on your game object. Or what you can do is click this button, add component, and type in print to console. So here's a little spoiler. Here Unity says add component, but what we did over here is we didn't do right click, create component. We did right click, create C# script. This is because all Unity scripts, all of the scripts that have this type of setup, you know, you have the little two dots and mono behavior right afterwards, are classified as components. You can think of them as scripts that you can attach to game objects. So think of the game object as a container that contains many different components, as many as you would like. And I would like you to notice as well that you even have transform over here, and that's a component too. If I go to main camera, camera is a component, and even this audio listener is a component. Light is a component too, because if I were to do add component, I would try to add another light. There it is. So everything in Unity is a script, just like the ones you create. Back to our print to log, or actually print to console. So you've most likely already seen this if you're watching this video and you watched other tutorials. And probably you've already seen something like debug.log hello world. And basically, if you're familiar with what start does, it just prints hello world as soon as you start the game. Because basically start is called the first time the game object is enabled, it enters the scene. So it might be a little confusing. People usually say it runs as soon as you start the game. That's not true. It does, just because your game objects are already enabled in the scene. But if I were to keep this disabled and then through code, like if I were to keep it disabled and press play, start would never be called. On the other hand, if I were to keep this enabled, the game object enabled, and press play, it would run. So that's basically how start works. While the update loop is once every frame. Let's just try it out. There you go, you have hello world that has been printed as soon as I pressed play and I started playing. Let's keep this disabled. See, nothing happened. But then, as soon as I enable this, hello world. With that being said, I want to get to the point slowly. So we can try to do this. We can try to add a little cube to our project. I'm gonna make the camera orthographic. If you don't know what that means, just don't worry. It means I can just grab it and exit 2D view. And like this, we can have a little something. So you can see our little cube over here. And the thing about a cube, is that it contains a lot of components. You have a mesh filter, a mesh renderer, and a box collider. Through script, you can access all of these. So I'm going to show you how. I want to write a script that when I press the E key, for example, which is typically used to interact, or F nowadays, I want to disable the mesh renderer. What does disabling the mesh renderer even do? So if I were to press on this little checkbox here, it disappears and then it reappears. You can do that through script, or through script you can even turn off cast shadows, receive shadows, because all of these items over here are variables. So I'm going to illustrate that. If I right click, create, C# script, I'm going to say hide mesh, or actually let's just say hide cube to keep it as simple as possible. I'll do this. We can create a public mesh renderer. Mesh renderer. Actually, no, I'll just call it rend. I usually call it like that. Yes. And we can do here is an update if input.getKeyDown keycode.e. We want to do rend.enabled is equal to false. So enabled is that little checkbox that I showed you before. Setting enabled to false just simply does this. It disables your component, because components that are updated per frame, so everything that has an update has a little checkbox on it. So if I drag hide cube over here, see, even hide cube can be enabled and disabled at will as well. When I said that everything over here is a variable, notice how even this component has a renderer and a variable that you can assign it to. I didn't reference a game object. Most likely you're used to referencing game objects, like that's the only thing that you can reference. But instead, you can even reference components like this. And there's two ways I could assign the mesh renderer. One is just click the component over here and drag right above it. Or, I'll just Control Z that. What I can do is click on the cube over here and drag it over here. But the most reliable way of doing it is clicking this and dragging it over here. That is because, for example, if we had multiple colliders on the same object, and then we would click and drag a game object onto our thing over here, onto our variable, what will happen is that it will choose the first one, but maybe we want another one. So in that case, it would be better to click and drag the specific component you want. Notice though, even if box collider is a component, it is not a mesh renderer. And over here, we wanted to accept only mesh renderer as the value of this variable. So that's why we can only accept this, and that's why Unity highlights this. Or else, you just get this kind of effect. Nothing happens. You can't do anything with it. Let's put our code to the test. Let's see if it becomes invisible. It disappeared. Wonderful. So that is how we reference a component. And to answer the question, how do I come up with all these algorithms? How do I come up with the ideas myself and stop looking at what other people do? Well, you can already look at programming patterns, for example, but what I would recommend you do is just keep in mind how Unity works. What are these components? And that even your scripts are components. And just start working with that. Try to think of procedures of what you can do to get the effect you want by messing with the components. By grabbing, I don't know, transform, you can get its position and you can increment the x by delta time, for example. And that allows you to move your object in this fashion, in this sort of way. If you mess with the x. If you mess with the y, that's what happens. If you mess with the z, this is what happens. Keep in mind that almost everything that you can do in the editor, you can also do through code. You can access everything that you see in the inspector, and you might even access even other things that are not exposed to the inspector. I will definitely cover that in future videos. But I want to give just one last example before wrapping this up. I want to do something else now. I want to have a toggle. So rend.enabled, like, I'll give you 5 seconds. How can I make this a toggle? How can I make enabled false and then true? Okay. So you might think the beginner approach would have been this, right? If the renderer is enabled, then we set it to false. Otherwise, we set it to true. So we can do that. If rend.enabled, we set it to false, else render.enabled is set to true. And this will easily allow us to toggle. E, it disappeared. I press E again, it reappears. And that's a great approach. That's perfect. It works. Don't care too much about the style. I'll just show you a different approach, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's better. Because as a beginner, the most important thing is to get things working. The other way to get it working would have been this. Render.enabled is equal to the opposite of its current value. This might look confusing, but it's exactly the same thing I wrote before. Basically, if it's true, I'm going to say it's not true. If it's false, if enabled is false when I press the E key, then I'm going to say set it to not false, which is basically true. And soon, the more you code, the more experience you have, the more often you'll find yourself cutting down lines of code. What is the benefit? I just said it's useless. Well, the benefit is that it will make your life a lot easier in the long run. So make sure your first games are very small. And it's probably something you've heard from a lot of other developers as well. Keep your games small. Well, they might say it's because your first 10 games will be trash, or it might be because you are unexperienced and your skill level keeps increasing. But the main reason for me is to tell you that to keep your games small, to make them very small, is because it's not like your 10 first games are going to be trash. The code in your first 10 games is not going to be that good, and that's okay. But it doesn't even mean that you have to make 10 games to be good at programming. It just takes time, and eventually, even within the same project, you'll find yourself becoming much better day after day. And this is especially true for beginners, that you would maybe look back at the code you wrote 2 weeks ago, and you would be like, why did I write this? Why is this happening? And you just go on and rewrite that as well. So the bigger the code, the more you write, the harder it will be to maintain if you do not know how to write maintainable code. And there's books, there's videos, there's hours of Udemy courses, there's even weeks of Udemy courses if you want, on how to write clean code, maintainable code, and all that other stuff. That's good, look into that. But at the same time, if you're just working on your project, you're just starting off, make sure you get it going. And how does what I explained here come into play when you're making a game? Let's say, for example, I want something to happen when a game object becomes true. In this script over here, I can have debug.log hello world in the start. Let's say we want something else to happen in our game. We want our start to cause an explosion. So our start actually is it has an instantiate that instantiates the prefab of a particle effect that represents the explosion along with the sound. Pretend that this debug.log does that, right? What we can do here is that we can also reference the game object, and we can reference the game object that is like say hello object, right? What we can do here is, let's use another key. If input.getKeyDown keycode dot I say hello object dot set active true. Now you might wonder, why is the component using enabled and why is set active doing it this way? The truth is that it is not a component. The game object contains components, but the game object itself is not a component. That is the difference. So doing this actually enables the game object. We have this little checkbox over here, if you can see my cursor, that is basically representing our active state. It's not the enabled state, it's the active state. So we can turn it off and on. And we can do that through code. We can give it a shot. We got a null reference exception and our say hello world script actually called. But the null reference happened because in our cube we did not reference the game object. And this printed because print to log was enabled. Let's turn this off. Then we go to our cube and we reference the game object like that. Now, what will happen is, as soon as we press I, you can notice that it's grayed out. That means that it's not active in the hierarchy. If I were to press I, hello world appeared because this has been set active, just like I showed you before. But what would be the better approach? What would be even better? Obviously, enabling and disabling game objects isn't the best thing to do always. It's good for particle effects, for sound effects, and for things that need to have a short lifespan. But for example, if we want something that needs to be activated and deactivated a few times, because maybe we want to print hello world for as many times as we press a button, it's going to be a little obnoxious to do set active true, set active false, true, false, to keep triggering start. What we can do instead is create a method. Public void say hello world. And we can just put this in here. And we can go to our hide cube. Now, think about it for a second. We have a game object, but say hello world, this method that we wrote over here, belongs to print to console. As I demonstrated before, with the reference to a component, you can access its variables, but you can also access other information. So inside the mesh renderer over here, you have access to lighting, probes, additional settings. You don't have access only to the enabled. The same applies for the scripts you write, for the components you create. So what you can do here is type in print to console. And what you can do here now is dot say hello world. There it goes. This is the method that we wrote. What will happen now is that every time we press I, the content of what we wrote in here will get executed. So in this case, it will say hello world. Press I. There you go, hello world. I'm gonna press I again, and he's gonna keep saying it for every time I push that button. You do have a type mismatch over here, which is weird. Well, either way, Unity is casting down. That's a weird thing to say, but the correct way to do it is this. You can drag your print to log and drag it over here, and you have your components already set up. And you have your reference right over there. And that sums up the basics of Unity's component system. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. I'll gladly help you. I'd also appreciate if you give the video a good thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you've enjoyed the video and want more content like this. It would help me out a lot. I'll see you on the next one.